I'm Margaret Wilson, 67 years old, and I built my restaurant business from nothing but determination and my grandmother's recipes. My 3 children, Grace, William, and Beverly, all grew up to be successful professionals with fancy lives. Despite giving them everything, our relationship has grown strained over the years. But nothing prepared me for that shocking evening when they excluded me from dining at my own restaurant, claiming I didn't belong there. If only they knew who really owned the place. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button if you want more real-life stories about family, betrayal, and sweet, unexpected justice. My story begins in a tiny coastal town in Maine, where I grew up knowing the value of hard work and simple living. My father worked at the local paper mill, and my mother cleaned houses for the wealthier families in our community. We never had much, but there was always food on the table and love in our home. I learned to cook standing on a stool beside my grandmother, Abigail, who could turn the most basic ingredients into meals that warmed both body and soul. When I met Richard Wilson during my senior year of high school, I felt like the luckiest girl alive. He was kind, hardworking, and had dreams bigger than our small town could hold. We married when I was 19, young and full of hope for the future we would build together. In 1982, with nothing but 2 suitcases and $300 between us, we moved to Boston. Richard had been offered a job as a maintenance worker at an apartment complex, and I found work waiting tables at a local diner. Our first apartment was tiny, with peeling wallpaper and temperamental plumbing, but it was ours and we were determined to make it work. Life threw us our first major challenge just 2 years later when Richard was diagnosed with a rare form of lymphoma. The medical bills started piling up faster than we could handle them. I took on a second job cleaning offices at night, then a third job on weekends helping an elderly neighbor with her grocery shopping and household chores. Sleep became a luxury I rarely enjoyed. By this time we had our first child, Grace. Despite the exhaustion, I would still get up early to make Richard's favorite breakfasts, determined to keep his spirits up during his treatments. I drew strength from my grandmother's memory, using her recipes to bring comfort to our struggling family. During one particularly difficult month when we could barely make rent, I started selling homemade sandwiches to Richard's coworkers. They were simple things, made with care and quality ingredients I would hunt for at the cheapest markets. The popularity of those lunches gave me an idea that would change our lives forever. For 3 years I saved every penny I could. Richard's health improved enough for him to work part-time, and with careful budgeting, I managed to put aside $12,000. It wasn't much to start a business, but it was enough to rent a tiny space with a kitchen and a few tables. In 1987, Wilson's Home Cooking opened its doors. The first 6 months were brutal. I would wake at 4 in the morning to prep, open at 6 to serve breakfast, work through lunch, close at 3, pick up Grace from the neighbor who watched her, cook dinner for my family, put her to bed, then plan menus and do bookkeeping until midnight. By this time we also had William, who was just a baby. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. But slowly, steadily, word began to spread. People came for my grandmother's buttermilk biscuits and stayed for the genuine care I put into every plate. Regular customers became friends. One elderly man, Arthur Jenkins, came every morning for 2 years for the same breakfast, telling me it reminded him of his late wife's cooking. By 1991, we had saved enough to move to a larger location. We renamed it Margaret's Place and expanded the menu to include dinner service. That same year we welcomed our third child, Beverly, into the world. Life was hectic but fulfilling. The restaurant was succeeding beyond our wildest dreams, and Richard's health had stabilized. But fate wasn't finished testing us. In 1993, Richard's cancer returned, more aggressive than before. This time, despite all the treatments and prayers, he didn't recover. I lost my husband and my children lost their father. Grace was 11, William was 7, and Beverly was just 2 years old. The grief was overwhelming, but I couldn't afford to collapse. 3 children depended on me, and the restaurant was our livelihood. So I pushed through the pain, working 18-hour days, building the business while raising my family alone. There were many nights when I set up a makeshift bed in my office, so the children could sleep while I finished the day's accounting. Throughout the 1990s, Margaret's Place grew in reputation and success. I focused on what I knew best: Simple food made with quality ingredients, served in a space that felt like home. Nothing fancy or pretentious, just honest cooking that satisfied both stomach and soul. I trained my staff to remember customers' names and preferences, to make everyone feel welcome whether they were celebrating a special occasion or just needed a quiet meal after a hard day. By the time the new millennium arrived, Margaret's Place had become one of the most respected family restaurants in Boston. Food critics praised our authentic home-style cuisine, but what made me proudest were the regular customers who came week after week, year after year, becoming almost like extended family. All this success came at a price, though. While I was building this business, I missed school plays and soccer games. I was often exhausted when I did have time with my children. I tried to make up for it by involving them in the restaurant when I could, teaching them to fold napkins or letting them help with simple food prep. But as they grew older, they became less interested in the restaurant and more focused on their own paths that would eventually lead them far away from their humble beginnings. As Margaret's Place flourished, I channeled much of our success into creating opportunities for my children that I never had. Education became my top priority for them. I wanted them to have choices in life, not to be forced into running a restaurant because they had no other options. Grace showed an aptitude for numbers from an early age. She could calculate the restaurant's daily earnings faster than I could, even as a teenager. When she expressed interest in business school, I encouraged her wholeheartedly. We visited campuses together, and when she was accepted to Wharton, I felt a pride so intense it brought tears to my eyes. The tuition was astronomical, nearly $80,000 per year, but I never hesitated. I remortgaged one of the restaurant properties to ensure she could attend without student loans burdening her future. William was always the most sensitive of my children. As a boy, he would bring home injured birds and stray cats, determined to heal them. His dream of becoming a doctor seemed perfectly aligned with his compassionate nature. Medical school was even more expensive than Grace's business education, but again, I found a way. I took no salary from the restaurant for 3 years, living off savings and working even longer hours to ensure his dream could become reality. My youngest, Beverly, inherited her father's artistic eye. She could look at a room and instantly envision how to transform it into something beautiful. Her interest in art and design blossomed during high school, and when she was accepted to Rhode Island School of Design, I celebrated by catering her entire class's graduation party at my own expense. Her education, art supplies, and first apartment in New York during her internship were all financed through my restaurant profits. I never resented these sacrifices. Seeing my children succeed was worth every long day, every aching foot, every missed vacation. What I didn't anticipate was how their success would change their perception of me and the world I had built for them. The first hints came during Grace's college years. When I visited her campus wearing my comfortable work clothes, I noticed her hesitation to introduce me to her new friends. She would quickly mention I worked in food service, without elaborating on my role as a business owner. At the time, I dismissed it as young adult embarrassment, something she would outgrow. After Grace graduated with honors, she took a position at a prestigious financial firm in Boston. There, she met Lawrence Hampton, a banking executive from a family with old money and older prejudices. The first time Lawrence came to the restaurant, he spent more time inspecting the silverware than enjoying the food. His comments about the quaint rustic charm of my life's work carried an undercurrent of condescension that Grace either didn't notice or chose to ignore. Their wedding was an elaborate affair at his family's estate in Connecticut. I felt out of place among the society people with their perfect accents and subtle signals of wealth. When Lawrence's mother asked about my background and I honestly shared my journey from waitress to restaurant owner, her tight smile and quick change of subject spoke volumes. Later that evening, I overheard her telling another guest how brave Grace was to overcome her circumstances. William's transformation was more gradual. Throughout medical school, he would still visit the restaurant, greeting the staff by name and sharing stories about his studies. But as he progressed through his residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, his visits became less frequent. His new circle of doctor friends never included me in their gatherings, despite my repeated invitations to host them at the restaurant. When William married Patricia, a dermatologist from a prominent family, the wedding was another exercise in feeling like an outsider in my own child's life. Patricia never tried to hide her disdain for my common mannerisms, once correcting my pronunciation of bruschetta at her own dinner table in front of guests. Beverly's art world connections pulled her furthest from me. After college, she opened a small gallery in Brooklyn that quickly became popular among the New York elite. Her new friends spoke in abstract terms about artistic movements I didn't understand, drank wines I couldn't pronounce, and seemed to communicate in a language of inside jokes and cultural references that excluded me entirely. When Beverly married Eric, a curator at a modern art museum, I wasn't even consulted about the wedding plans. I received a formal invitation in the mail, as though I were a distant acquaintance rather than the mother who had supported her every dream. At the reception, I was seated at a table far from the wedding party, with distant relatives who barely knew my daughter. As their lives grew more sophisticated, my children began excluding me from important events. Grace would mention dinner parties with Lawrence's colleagues after they had already occurred. William would share photos on social media of family trips I hadn't been invited to join. Beverly would be in Boston for art exhibitions without ever calling to let me know she was in town. Their excuses were always similar. It was just a small gathering, Mom. Or we didn't think you'd be comfortable with those people. Or most hurtfully, you wouldn't have fit in. Despite these painful rejections, I continued to support them financially. When Grace and Lawrence wanted to buy a vacation home in Vermont, I provided the down payment as a loan. They never repaid. When William needed startup capital for his private practice, I liquidated some investments to help him. When Beverly's gallery faced closure during an economic downturn, I anonymously provided funds through a business manager to keep it afloat. Throughout all of this, I never flaunted my financial success. I lived in the same modest 3-bedroom apartment I had moved into after Richard died, drove the same reliable car for 15 years, and dressed in comfortable, practical clothing suitable for long days at the restaurant. This wasn't because I couldn't afford better, but because these things were enough for me. Contentment with what you have was a value I had tried, and apparently failed, to instill in my children. My modest lifestyle, combined with my reluctance to discuss the restaurant's financial details, led my children to assume I was barely getting by. None of them ever asked about the business's success or offered to help, even as Margaret's Place expanded to additional locations and my investments grew. They saw me as the struggling widow, the hardworking mother who had sacrificed everything for them, without realizing that those sacrifices had built something truly valuable, both financially and culturally. In their minds, I was still just a restaurant manager, not the sole owner of a thriving business that had put all 3 of them through college without debt. And perhaps, in my desire to keep them grounded, I had inadvertently contributed to this misconception. But I never imagined it would lead to the humiliation that awaited me. About 5 years ago, as I approached my 62nd birthday, I made the decision to step back from the day-to-day operations of Margaret's Place. My knees weren't what they used to be, and decades of standing in kitchens had taken their toll on my body. I hired Frank Peterson, a longtime employee who had started as a dishwasher 20 years earlier, and worked his way up to manager, to take over daily operations. Frank was like the son who actually wanted to follow in my footsteps. He understood the heart and soul of Margaret's Place, respected our traditions, and had innovative ideas that honored our history while moving us forward. The restaurant continued to thrive under his management, and I maintained ownership while shifting to a more advisory role, coming in a few days a week to check on things and keep my hand in the business I had built. This transition gave me something I'd rarely experienced: free time. I imagined my children might welcome the opportunity to spend more of it with me, now that I wasn't constantly working. I was wrong. If anything, they became even more distant, their visits to my modest apartment in Dorchester becoming annual events rather than weekly or monthly gatherings. What did increase, however, were their expectations for financial support. Despite their own successful careers, they seemed to view my resources as an extension of their own, available whenever they needed or wanted something beyond their means. Grace, who was making a 6-figure salary at her investment firm, called me one evening about Lawrence's new business venture. "Mom, Lawrence is starting a hedge fund with some colleagues. It's a fantastic opportunity, but they need initial investors. We thought you might want to get in on the ground floor. It's only $200,000 for the minimum buy-in." When I asked for a business plan and expressed concern about such a large investment, her tone turned cold. I didn't realize we needed to present a formal proposal to our own mother. Never mind, we'll find the money elsewhere. She didn't call again for 3 months. William was more subtle but equally presumptuous. During one of his rare visits, he casually mentioned plans to expand his medical practice. The equipment alone costs nearly $500,000, but it's state-of-the-art. I've been thinking about how to finance it. The expectation in his eyes was clear as he looked around my simple living room with its second-hand furniture. It must be nice having the restaurant practically running itself now. Less stress, more passive income, right? He had no idea that I had reinvested most of the profits back into the business, creating retirement funds for long-term employees and establishing a scholarship for culinary students from disadvantaged backgrounds. To him, I was just sitting on a pile of money that could be better used to advance his career. Beverly's requests were the most frequent. Her gallery was perpetually on the edge of financial disaster, not because it wasn't successful, but because she and Eric lived well beyond their means. "Mom, we need to secure this new collection from an emerging artist in Berlin. It's only $30,000, but it could really put the gallery on the map." When I suggested she save up for such purchases, she sighed dramatically. "By then, someone else will have discovered her. This is how the art world works." Despite my growing discomfort with their entitled attitudes, I continued to help them. I paid for Grace and Lawrence's son's private school tuition when they complained about the cost. I covered the down payment on William and Patricia's summer house on Cape Cod. I funded Beverly and Eric's trip to an art fair in Miami, when their gallery was selected to participate. But with each check I wrote, each transfer I made, I felt the respect they had for me diminish. Their gratitude became perfunctory, their expectations greater. There were no more thank you cards, no special visits to express appreciation, just a growing sense that my purpose in their lives was to provide financial support, while requiring nothing in return, not even basic courtesy. The disrespect became increasingly obvious in our interactions. During holiday gatherings, they would talk over me, dismiss my contributions to conversations, or worse, speak to me slowly and loudly as though age had affected my comprehension rather than just my needs. Phone calls became painful exercises in patience. Grace would call only when she needed something, barely asking about my life before launching into her requests. William would put me on speakerphone while doing other tasks, his distraction evident in his half-hearted responses. Beverly would text rather than call, her messages brief and often containing links to items she wanted me to purchase for her. Their spouses were even worse. Lawrence would make jokes about dining at Mom's greasy spoon, when they had to cancel plans with me in favor of more sophisticated engagements. Patricia once suggested I update my look by sending me expensive clothes that were completely impractical for my lifestyle. Eric barely acknowledged my existence, finding endless fascination in his phone whenever we were in the same room. As my children pulled away, I found family in unexpected places. The staff at Margaret's place became my support system. Frank would bring me homemade soup when I caught a cold. Julia, our head waitress for 15 years, invited me to her children's school events, proudly introducing me as Grandma Margaret. Carlos, our chef who had started as a line cook 20 years ago, insisted I join his family for their Sunday dinners, where I was treated with a respect my own children no longer showed me. One tradition I maintained was the annual staff appreciation dinner. Every year, I would close the restaurant for one evening and treat my employees and their families to a multi-course meal where they were the guests of honor. I served them personally, cooking many of the dishes myself, wanting them to feel the same care they showed our customers daily. These people knew the real Margaret Wilson. They knew the hard work, the integrity, and yes, the success that defined my life. They knew I could afford a penthouse apartment and designer clothes if I wanted them, but they respected my choice to live simply. They understood that my wealth was measured not just in dollars but in the community I had built. My children, however, saw only what they wanted to see. In their eyes, I had become a financial resource wrapped in an embarrassing package. A mother whose working-class mannerisms and simple tastes were at odds with the sophisticated lives they had constructed for themselves. They assumed I was struggling financially because I chose not to flaunt my success, because I still clipped coupons out of habit, and wore comfortable shoes instead of designer labels. This misconception would soon lead to the most painful moment of my life since losing Richard, a moment that would force me to finally see my children for who they had become rather than who I had raised them to be. Last spring, I overheard Frank on the phone taking a reservation for a large party. "Yes, Ms. Hampton, we can accommodate 12 people at 7 o'clock next Friday. The private dining room? Certainly it's available. The occasion? Wonderful, we'll make sure it's special for your birthday." After he hung up, I asked casually, "Was that Grace Hampton making a reservation?" Frank nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, she booked the private room for her birthday dinner. She specifically requested our best server and the premium wine list." My heart lifted at the thought. Grace hadn't invited me to celebrate her birthday in years. Perhaps this was her way of including me, choosing my restaurant as a gesture of reconciliation. I didn't mention to Frank that I hadn't received an invitation, assuming it had been delayed in the mail or that Grace planned to call me later. But no call came. No invitation arrived. 3 days before the dinner, I still hadn't heard anything from Grace. I decided to call her myself, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "Grace, honey, I heard you're having your birthday dinner at Margaret's place on Friday. What time should I arrive?" The pause on the other end of the line was telling. "Oh, Mom, I didn't think you'd want to come. It's just a small thing with some friends and colleagues." "Small? Frank mentioned you reserved the private room for 12 people. Another pause. "Well, yes, but it's mainly Lawrence's business associates. Very boring financial talk, you know. Not your scene at all." The dismissal stung, but I pressed on. "I'd still like to come, sweetheart. It's your birthday, and we haven't celebrated together in so long." Her sigh was audible. "Fine, Mom. 7 o'clock. But please don't make a scene or tell embarrassing stories, okay? These people are important to Lawrence's career." The conversation left me feeling hollow, but I was determined to make an effort. For the next 2 days, I contemplated what to wear, eventually settling on a navy blue dress I had purchased for a restaurant industry award ceremony the previous year. It was the most expensive item in my wardrobe, simple but elegant, with a subtle pearl necklace to complement it. I even scheduled an appointment at a salon to have my hair styled, something I rarely indulged in. The evening of the dinner, I arrived at Margaret's place at 6:45, wanting a few moments to collect myself before joining Grace's party. The restaurant looked beautiful, the soft lighting creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. Frank greeted me with surprise. "Margaret, I didn't know you were joining Miss Hampton's party. You look lovely." "Thank you, Frank. It's my daughter's birthday. Of course I'd be here." He nodded, but something in his expression suggested concern. "They arrived about 10 minutes ago. I've seated them in the private room as requested." As I approached the room, I could hear laughter and the clink of glasses. Through the partially open door, I glimpsed my 3 children, along with their spouses and several people I didn't recognize. Grace was seated at the head of the table, wearing a red designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. William and Patricia sat to her right, while Beverly and Eric were engaged in animated conversation with a woman wearing more jewelry than clothing. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The conversation didn't stop immediately, but a gradual hush fell over the room as people noticed me standing there. Grace's smile froze on her face. "Mom? What are you doing here?" I stepped forward, suddenly aware of every eye on me. "I'm here for your birthday, sweetheart. We spoke about it, remember?" William stood halfway, an awkward gesture that was neither welcoming nor dismissive. "Mother, we didn't realize you were coming. There isn't really space at the table." I looked at the table, where 12 settings were arranged with one empty chair. "There seems to be room for one more." Beverly didn't even stand, merely exchanging a look with Eric that spoke volumes. Lawrence cleared his throat and stepped forward, placing himself between me and the table. "Margaret, this is really more of a business dinner combined with a small celebration. I'm not sure you would enjoy yourself among all this shop talk." His tone was that of an adult speaking to a child, patronizing and firm. Before I could respond, Patricia added, "Besides, this is quite an expensive evening. The wine alone is hundreds of dollars per bottle. We wouldn't want you to feel obligated to contribute when we know your situation is modest." The heat of embarrassment crept up my neck. William at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, but he made no move to contradict his wife. Beverly studied her manicure, avoiding my eyes entirely. Eric, who had always been the most openly disdainful of my background, actually moved to block the empty chair with his body. I think what everyone is trying to say is that this gathering has a certain caliber of guest. No offense, but you might feel out of place. The room had gone completely silent now, other guests watching the scene unfold with uncomfortable fascination. I stood there, clutching my small purse, feeling more alone than I had in years. Grace finally stood, her face flushed with either embarrassment or anger, perhaps both. "Mom, I think it's best if you go. We didn't include you in the invitation for a reason. This is an important night for me professionally and frankly." She lowered her voice, but not enough to prevent others from hearing. "A poor woman like you doesn't deserve to be here. Go away before you embarrass us further." The words hit me like physical blows. I saw several of the guests exchange shocked glances. One woman covered her mouth with her hand. Another man stared down at his plate, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. In that moment, I could have revealed everything. I could have told them all that this restaurant, this successful, respected establishment where they were happy to spend hundreds of dollars on wine and gourmet food, belonged entirely to me. I could have exposed their cruel hypocrisy in front of all their important business associates. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was dignity, or perhaps it was the final thread of maternal protection, not wanting to humiliate my children even as they humiliated me. Instead, I straightened my shoulders, looked each of them in the eye for a long moment, and turned to leave without another word. As I walked through the main dining room, I felt the curious stares of other customers who had glimpsed the confrontation. Frank intercepted me near the entrance, his face creased with concern. "Margaret, what happened? Are you all right?" I shook my head, unable to speak through the tightness in my throat. Tears threatened, but I refused to shed them here. "Don't say anything to them," I managed finally. "Let them enjoy their dinner. But call me when they ask for the check." Frank's eyes widened slightly as understanding dawned. He nodded once, squeezing my arm gently. "I'll take care of it, boss." The drive home was a blur of streetlights and suppressed tears. In my apartment, I carefully hung up the blue dress, put away the pearl necklace, and washed my face, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had given everything to three people who had just made it abundantly clear that she wasn't good enough for them. Not good enough to share a meal with. Not good enough to acknowledge in public. Not good enough to treat with basic human dignity. As I made myself a cup of tea, I realized that something had broken inside me, something that could never be repaired. The unconditional love of a mother had finally met its limit. And for the first time in my life, I found myself planning how to stop enabling the monsters I had inadvertently created. I barely slept that night, replaying the scene at the restaurant over and over in my mind. Each remembered word cut deeper upon reflection. "A poor woman like you doesn't deserve to be here." My own daughter had said those words to me, in front of strangers, without a flicker of remorse in her eyes. By morning, a calm resolution had replaced my hurt and shock. I reached for my phone and called Frank. "Good morning, Margaret. How are you feeling today?" "I've been better, Frank, but I've made some decisions. Did my children enjoy their dinner last night?" Frank's hesitation was brief but noticeable. "They stayed until nearly midnight. Ordered the most expensive items on the menu, went through 5 bottles of our reserve wines. The bill came to just over $3,000. I nodded to myself. And how did they behave toward the staff? Another pause. Lawrence complained about the temperature of his steak twice. Patricia sent back her cocktail 3 times. The rest were demanding but not outright rude. I see. Frank, I need you to do something for me. They'll be expecting the bill to be delivered to Grace or Lawrence. When they ask for it, I want you to personally bring them this message instead. I detailed my instructions carefully. Are you sure about this, Margaret? It could get uncomfortable. I'm sure, Frank. And I'll be there to handle any fallout. I'll come in around noon and wait in your office. Let me know when they're asking for the check. After hanging up, I spent the morning reviewing my financial records and making calls to my lawyer. By the time I arrived at the restaurant, I had set several significant changes in motion. Frank greeted me with concern but respected my determined mood, showing me to his office where I could wait unseen. Around 1:30, Frank's phone rang. "They're asking for the bill now," he reported after answering. "Are you ready?" I nodded, moving to a position where I could observe without being immediately seen. Frank headed to the private dining room with a leather folder in hand. Through the partially open door, I could see my children and their spouses, looking satisfied after what appeared to be an extensive lunch. They must have returned to continue the celebration, likely expecting the same preferential treatment they'd received the night before. Frank approached the table with professional courtesy. "Mr. Hampton, Miss Hampton, I hope you enjoyed your meal today." Lawrence nodded dismissively, holding out his hand for the bill without looking up from his conversation. Frank didn't hand over the folder. "Actually, sir, I've been instructed to inform you that your party's meals yesterday evening and today have been taken care of according to Ms. Wilson's standing instructions." Grace's head snapped up. "What are you talking about? What standing instructions?" Frank maintained his professional demeanor. "Ms. Wilson has a policy that family members dine complimentary at all her establishments. As the owner of Margaret's Place, she has extended this courtesy to you." The table fell silent. Lawrence's face contorted in confusion. "There must be some mistake. Margaret Wilson doesn't own this restaurant. She's just the manager, or was before she retired." Frank shook his head slightly. "No, sir. Ms. Wilson founded this restaurant 38 years ago, and remains the sole owner of not just this location but our other 2 branches as well. She is also the majority shareholder in our recently launched line of retail products." William stood abruptly. "That's impossible. Our mother would have told us if she owned all of this." "I believe she tried to tell you many times, Dr. Wilson, in ways that perhaps weren't about explicitly stating her financial status." Beverly's face had drained of color. "This is some kind of joke, right? My mother lives in a small apartment in Dorchester. She wears the same clothes for years. She clips coupons, for God's sake." "Those are her choices, ma'am, not her limitations," Frank replied evenly. "Ms. Wilson has always preferred to live simply and invest in things she values: her business, her employees, her community, and her family." Lawrence's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "I want to speak to whoever's really in charge here. This is ridiculous." "That would be me." I stepped into the room, and 6 heads turned simultaneously in my direction. Gone was the navy blue dress from last night. Today I wore what I always wore at the restaurant: simple black pants, comfortable shoes, and a crisp white button-down shirt with "Margaret's Place" embroidered in small letters over the pocket. It was the uniform of someone who worked for a living, someone who knew the value of comfort and practicality, someone who had never needed expensive clothes to feel worthy of respect. "Mom!" Grace's voice was barely audible. "Yes, Grace. Your mother. The poor woman who doesn't deserve to be here." I moved to the head of the table, where Frank had pulled out a chair for me. "The same poor woman who paid for your Wharton education, your wedding, your son's private school tuition, and the down payment on your vacation home." William started to speak, but I held up my hand. "The same poor woman who financed your medical school, your first practice, your equipment upgrades, and your summer house on the Cape." My gaze shifted to Beverly. "The same poor woman who covered your art school expenses, your gallery startup costs, your living expenses in New York, and that trip to Berlin last month to acquire new pieces." I looked at each of their spouses in turn. "The same poor woman you've all been so embarrassed by, so quick to dismiss, so eager to exclude from your sophisticated lives while having no problem accepting her money." The silence in the room was absolute. Other diners in the restaurant had quieted, some openly watching the drama unfold. I didn't care. After decades of discretion, I was finally speaking my truth. "What you saw last night and what you see today is who I am. I wear practical clothes because I value comfort over fashion. I live in a modest apartment because it meets my needs and keeps me connected to the community that supported this restaurant from the beginning. I drive a practical car because it's reliable, not because I can't afford a luxury vehicle." I gestured around the restaurant. "Everything you see here I built from nothing. Not for status or to impress people, but because I loved creating a place where people could enjoy good food and feel at home. I never flaunted my success because I wanted you three to value hard work and humility. Clearly, I failed in that lesson. Lawrence attempted to interject, his businessman instincts kicking in. Margaret, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. We had no idea about the extent of your assets. If you'd known I was wealthy, you would have treated me with basic human dignity? I cut him off. That's not an apology, Lawrence. That's an admission that you only respect people based on their financial status. William leaned forward. Mom, you can't blame us for not knowing. You never told us about all this. I shouldn't have had to tell you, William. A son shouldn't need a financial statement to treat his mother with respect. Did I really raise children who only value people for their bank accounts? Beverly was crying now, mascara tracking down her cheeks. Mom, we're sorry. What happened last night was terrible. We were wrong. Yes, you were wrong. And not just last night. You've been wrong for years, treating me like an obligation rather than your mother, acting ashamed of me in front of your friends, excluding me from your lives except when you needed money. I looked each of them in the eye. As of this morning, I've made some changes. The trust funds I established for each of you have been dissolved. The monthly allowances you've been receiving have been terminated. The standing offers to cover your children's education, your business expansions, your gallery acquisitions, all of it gone. Their faces registered shock, then alarm. Grace found her voice first. Mom, you can't do that. We have commitments, plans based on those funds. Actually, I can and I have. The money was always mine to give or withhold. You never earned it, never appreciated it, and clearly never respected its source. But what about our children? William protested. Your grandchildren shouldn't suffer because of a disagreement between us. My grandchildren will be fine. I've established separate trusts for their education that you cannot access. They'll receive those funds when they turn 18, provided they maintain certain academic standards and complete community service hours. Unlike their parents, they'll learn that money comes with responsibility. Lawrence's businessman mask slipped completely. This is outrageous. We could challenge this legally. There must be promises made, implied contracts. By all means, Lawrence, consult your lawyers. My legal team would be happy to provide them with documentation of every gift freely given with no strings attached, every loan that was never repaid despite signed agreements, every investment made with no return expected or received. I may dress simply, but I've never been foolish about protecting myself legally. The realization that I was serious began to sink in. Their faces showed the calculations happening behind their eyes, the sudden understanding that the financial safety net they had taken for granted was gone. You've shown me who you truly are, I said quietly, and it's time I accepted it. The restaurant remains open to you as customers. You'll receive the same excellent service all our patrons enjoy, no better and no worse. You'll be expected to pay your bills like everyone else. And if you ever decide you want a relationship with me based on love and respect rather than financial advantage, my personal number remains the same. I stood to leave but turned back with one final thought. I built this business from nothing while raising 3 children alone after your father died. I worked 18-hour days for decades to give you every advantage in life. I never complained, never asked for recognition, never expected gratitude. But I did expect basic human decency. Remember that the next time you're tempted to call someone poor, like it's a character flaw, rather than a circumstance. With that, I walked out of the private dining room, head held high, leaving my stunned children and their spouses to process what had just happened. As I passed through the main dining area, several regular customers nodded in approval, or reached out to squeeze my hand. They had witnessed enough to understand. And in their eyes I saw something my own children had failed to show me: respect. The immediate aftermath of my confrontation with my children was both painful and liberating. As I had anticipated, my phone began ringing incessantly within hours. Grace called 17 times that afternoon alone. William left a series of increasingly desperate voicemails. Beverly sent text after text, alternating between apologies and accusations of cruelty. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I did something I should have done years earlier. I changed my phone number, providing the new one only to people who genuinely cared about me. Frank got it, of course, as did Julia, Carlos, and a handful of other longtime employees who had become like family. My lawyer received it with strict instructions about who could and couldn't be given access to me. For the first time in decades, I took time for myself. I hired a professional organizer to help me sort through years of accumulated possessions, donating what I didn't need and creating a living space that truly reflected my tastes, rather than just my practicality. I kept my apartment in Dorchester not because I couldn't afford better, but because I loved the neighborhood and the sense of community I had built there. The process of legally removing my children from my will was less emotionally satisfying than I had imagined. Sitting in my lawyer's office, signing document after document, I felt a profound sadness rather than vindication. These were the three people I had brought into the world, raised with love and somehow lost along the way. "Are you sure about this, Margaret?" my lawyer Diane asked gently as I signed the final page. "Disinheriting children is a serious step." "I'm not leaving them destitute, Diane. They each have successful careers and considerable assets of their own, much of it provided by me over the years. What I'm doing is redirecting my legacy to people and causes that reflect my values." Those causes included a substantial endowment for a culinary scholarship program for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, a fund to help restaurant workers facing medical crises, and a community kitchen program that would provide job training while feeding those in need. I also established trusts for my grandchildren that emphasized education and community service, structured to reward compassion and hard work rather than entitlement. With these important matters settled, I did something I had never allowed myself before. I traveled. Not to luxurious resorts or on guided tours, but to places that had always intrigued me, especially those known for their culinary traditions. I spent 3 weeks in Italy, learning authentic pasta-making techniques from grandmothers in Tuscany. I visited small family restaurants in Sicily, exchanging recipes and stories with owners whose experiences mirrored my own. In these travels, I discovered a world of people who valued what I valued: hard work, authenticity, generosity, and food made with love. I made friends who appreciated Margaret Wilson for who she was, not what she could provide them. We stayed in touch via email and video calls, sharing photos of our latest cooking experiments and stories about our families. While I was finding myself anew abroad, my children were escalating their attempts to reach me at home. Frank reported that Grace had shown up at the restaurant 3 times, demanding to see me, growing increasingly hostile when told I wasn't available. She threatened to call the police and report me kidnapped the last time, he told me during one of our weekly video calls. I had to remind her that you're a 67-year-old woman with all your faculties intact, free to travel without her permission. William took a different approach, contacting my lawyer with concerns about my mental health. He suggested you might be experiencing cognitive decline and making irrational financial decisions, Diane reported, unable to keep the indignation from her voice. I informed him that I had seen no evidence of anything but clear-headed decision-making on your part. Beverly's tactics were more emotional. She sent handwritten letters to my apartment, knowing they would be forwarded, filled with tearful apologies and reminiscences about her childhood. "Remember how you used to sing me to sleep with "You Are My Sunshine," she wrote. "Remember how you kept all my childhood drawings and hung them in your office?" The letters were touching but conspicuously avoided acknowledging the specific cruelty that had precipitated our estrangement. What all 3 approaches had in common was their focus on regaining access to my financial support rather than making genuine amends. Grace's angry demands, William's attempts to question my competence, and Beverly's emotional manipulation all circled around the same unspoken goal: restoring the flow of money they had come to depend on. Meanwhile, I was discovering joy in unexpected places. I enrolled in a photography class and found I had a good eye for composition. I joined a book club at my local library and enjoyed lively discussions about literature I'd never had time to read before. I even started dating, tentatively at first, accepting an invitation to coffee from Arthur, a kind widower I met at a community garden project. Arthur was everything my children's spouses were not: unpretentious, genuinely interested in my life and experiences, and impressed by my accomplishments without being intimidated or resentful. He had built a successful plumbing business from scratch, and understood the dedication required to create something lasting. On our third date, when I finally told him the full story of my estrangement from my children, his response was refreshingly straightforward. "Sounds to me like they forgot who raised them and what you sacrificed," he said, shaking his head. "My kids aren't perfect, but they'd never treat their mother that way, rich or poor." As months passed, I found myself stepping back into an active role at Margaret's place, but on my own terms. Frank remained the day-to-day manager, but I began working with him on expansion plans, including a fourth location in a revitalizing neighborhood that other restaurateurs considered too risky. I also started a mentorship program for young chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds, sharing not just cooking techniques but business knowledge I had acquired over decades. The community outreach program I developed became a central part of our business model. Every Monday, when the restaurant was traditionally closed, we opened our kitchens to teach cooking skills to unemployed residents, single parents, and at-risk youth. These classes provided valuable job training, while preparing meals that were distributed to elderly residents who couldn't easily cook for themselves. Arthur supported these initiatives wholeheartedly, often volunteering his plumbing services when we renovated spaces for our programs. Our relationship deepened gradually, built on mutual respect and shared values. He never moved into my apartment, maintaining his own home a few blocks away, but we spent most evenings together, cooking, watching old movies, or simply enjoying each other's company. As I rebuilt my life around people who genuinely cared for me, my children continued their attempts to reestablish contact, their approaches evolving as they realized I wasn't going to simply forgive and forget. Grace began sending formal business proposals rather than demands, outlining investment opportunities with detailed projections. William shifted from questioning my mental health to expressing concern about my physical well-being, sending articles about health risks for women my age. Beverly's emotional appeals became more sophisticated, including photo albums she had created of family moments and milestones. None of them, however, directly addressed what they had done or showed genuine remorse that wasn't tied to financial consequences. They wanted the restoration of financial support without the uncomfortable work of acknowledging how deeply they had hurt me. And so, despite the occasional pang of maternal longing, I maintained my distance, focusing instead on building a life filled with purpose, joy, and authentic connections. After nearly a year of this new existence, I had become someone my younger self wouldn't have recognized. More confident, less willing to accept disrespect, and surprisingly, happier than I had been in decades. I had stopped defining myself primarily as a mother and business owner, and begun to explore who Margaret Wilson was beyond those roles. The answer, it turned out, was someone worth knowing, even without the titles and responsibilities that had previously defined me. 1 year after that painful dinner at Margaret's place, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The restaurant business had expanded to include a third location in Cambridge, catering primarily to university students and faculty, with more affordable menu options, while maintaining our commitment to quality ingredients and home-style cooking. My cookbook, From Nothing to Something, Recipes and Wisdom from Margaret's Kitchen, had become an unexpected bestseller. The publishing deal had come about through a chance meeting with a literary agent who dined at the restaurant and was captivated by the story Frank shared about my journey. The book wasn't just recipes but a memoir of sorts, chronicling my path from a struggling widow to a successful entrepreneur, interwoven with the dishes that had sustained me along the way. The success of the book led to several television appearances on local morning shows, and even a segment on a national cooking program. I found myself at 68, becoming something of a minor celebrity, particularly among women who found inspiration in my story of perseverance and late-in-life reinvention. Throughout this period of professional success, I had maintained my distance from my 3 children. Their attempts to contact me had gradually decreased as they realized I was serious about requiring genuine change, rather than performative apologies. Grace and William had essentially given up, occasionally sending formal birthday and holiday cards with no personal messages. Beverly, however, continued to reach out, her approaches becoming less manipulative and more reflective over time. It was pure coincidence that brought Beverly and me face to face again. I was at a small grocery store near my apartment, selecting fresh vegetables for dinner with Arthur, when I turned a corner and found myself looking directly at my youngest daughter. She had lost weight, and her usually perfect appearance was slightly disheveled, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. For a moment, we both froze, uncertain how to proceed. Then Beverly spoke, her voice small and hesitant, so unlike her usual confident tone. "Mom, is that really you?" I nodded, maintaining a calm exterior despite my racing heart. "Hello, Beverly. How are you?" She seemed shocked that I had responded without walking away. "I'm not great, actually. Eric and I separated 6 months ago." The gallery closed. "I've been staying with a friend in the neighborhood while I figure things out." The news surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Beverly and Eric's relationship had always seemed based more on mutual advantage than genuine affection, and their lifestyle had been unsustainably lavish. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said and meant it. Despite everything, I never wanted my children to suffer. Beverly looked down at her shopping basket, which contained only ramen noodles, a loaf of bread, and a jar of peanut butter. "It turns out I'm not very good at budgeting. Never had to learn, I guess." The implied criticism wasn't lost on me, but I chose not to address it. "Would you like to get a cup of coffee?" I found myself asking, surprising us both. The cafe across from the grocery store was quiet that afternoon. Beverly stirred her latte absently, clearly struggling with what to say. Finally, she looked up, her eyes filling with tears. "I've been trying to call you, to apologize. For everything, but especially for that night at the restaurant." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I was horrible to you. We all were. There's no excuse for it." She swallowed hard. "I've had a lot of time to think since everything fell apart. About who I became, who we all became. And I'm ashamed." "What exactly are you ashamed of, Beverly?" I needed to hear her name it, to know she truly understood. "We treated you like you were beneath us. Like your worth was tied to your money or your status. We took everything you gave us for granted. We acted entitled to your support, while being embarrassed by your existence." Her voice broke. "We forgot who you were, who you've always been. The strongest, most generous person I've ever known." It was the first genuine acknowledgement I had heard from any of my children. Not an apology designed to regain financial support, but a real recognition of the harm they had caused. "What about Grace and William? Do they share this perspective?" Beverly shook her head sadly. "Grace is still angry. She blames you for overreacting, says you betrayed us by cutting us off. William follows her lead as usual. They're both doing fine financially, but they miss the extra cushion you provided. And you? Are you here because you need money, Beverly?" Her face flushed. "I won't lie and say I couldn't use help, but that's not why I've been trying to reach you. I miss my mother. I miss who I was when I still deserved to be your daughter." We talked for over 2 hours that afternoon, Beverly opening up about the collapse of her marriage, her gallery, and the facade of success she had maintained for years. Eric had been having affairs throughout their marriage, and their financial situation had been precarious long before I cut off my support. My withdrawal of funds had simply accelerated an inevitable collapse. "In a weird way, it was the best thing that could have happened," she admitted. "It forced me to face reality instead of continuing the charade." I didn't commit to anything that day, but I did agree to meet Beverly again the following week. Our coffee dates became a regular occurrence, cautious at first, then gradually more comfortable as we re-established a relationship based on honest communication, rather than financial dependency. Beverly was the only one of my children making a genuine effort at reconciliation. Grace remained entrenched in her resentment, sending a cease and desist letter through her attorney when my cookbook mentioned my children without using their names. William maintained a cool distance, sending a Christmas card signed by his entire family with a brief note saying they were open to reconciliation when you're ready to be reasonable. I found peace in accepting that I might never have the relationship I had hoped for with all my children. Beverly's genuine efforts at change were enough to give me hope, but I no longer defined my worth by my children's approval or affection. My relationship with Arthur deepened into a comfortable companionship that brought joy to my daily life. We never married, both content with our independent living arrangements while spending most of our time together. He accompanied me on book tours, cheered from the audience during my television appearances, and proudly introduced me to friends as the amazing woman who built a restaurant empire from scratch. The foundation I established to help single parents start businesses became my passion project. Remembering my own struggles as a widowed mother trying to launch a restaurant, I structured the program to provide not just funding but mentorship, childcare assistance, and emotional support. Watching these determined parents succeed against the odds brought me a fulfillment that all the financial success in the world couldn't match. One afternoon, sitting in the original Margaret's Place location with Arthur, watching a young family enjoy a meal together, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. The painful exclusion from my children's dinner had been a breaking point, but also a breakthrough, forcing me to recognize patterns I had enabled for too long and find the courage to establish boundaries I should have set years earlier. You know what I've learned through all this? I said to Arthur, who looked up from his coffee with interest. Family isn't always defined by blood. It's defined by respect, by mutual care, by showing up for each other consistently. He nodded, covering my hand with his. Your restaurant staff understood that before your own kids did. True. And I've learned that it's never too late to stop accepting mistreatment, no matter who it comes from. That requiring respect isn't selfish, it's necessary. In the year since I had confronted my children, I had rebuilt my life around people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide them. Frank, Julia, and Carlos from the restaurant. The participants in my foundations programs. My book readers who wrote touching letters about how my story had inspired them. Arthur with his steady presence and unassuming wisdom. Even Beverly, who was slowly earning back my trust through consistent effort and genuine remorse. I had lost what I thought I needed, my children's approval and affection, only to discover that what I truly needed was self-respect and the courage to demand better treatment. The woman who had been too afraid to embarrass her cruel children at that fateful dinner had been replaced by someone who understood her own worth, who no longer confused self-sacrifice with love or enablement with support. As I looked around the restaurant I had built from nothing, surrounded by the community that had embraced me, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for decades. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to what you truly need. Sometimes the most painful rejections lead to the most necessary reckonings. And sometimes, just sometimes, finding yourself matters more than being found worthy by others. I wonder, have you ever had to choose between maintaining a relationship and maintaining your self-respect? What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, even against family. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you allow yourself to be treated.